My name's Alyssa.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Britney.
We did our study on family history and personal history of chronic diseases and how it affects the health literacy of those diseases. We looked at chronic diseases because the World Health Organization reported that 71% of deaths worldwide were due to chronic diseases. The definition of these diseases are prolonged signs and symptoms that require ongoing management over a period of time and sometimes even a lifetime. We specifically looked at obesity, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes because the CDC reported that they are some of the most prevalent chronic diseases in the United States. More specifically, obesity has nearly tripled in less than 50 years. If you think about it, that is insane. That's a lot. And cardiovascular disease accounted for 80% of deaths in developing nations. And the American Heart Association predicts that by 2025, the cases of diabetes will double to 300 million within that 10-year time frame.
So a little background on what health literacy is. Health literacy is defined as the ability to control and manage chronic diseases through lifestyle factors. Low health literacy has been associated with greater mortality rates, greater hospitalizations, and lower use of preventative health care measures. So overall, just poor health outcomes. Right now, only 12% of Americans have proficient ability to make their own decisions about their health. This is only about 1 out of 10 Americans. And a reason for this is because of the public health information that is handed out to patients. The National Institute of Health recommends a 6th to 7th grade reading level for material. However, the material that is handed out to patients is at a 10th to 14th grade reading level. So there is a misunderstanding when information is handed out.
Our study specifically looked at family history and personal history of disease and how that can affect health literacy. So we measured health literacy scores using a health literacy questionnaire, which those are designed to assess a community's need based on their knowledge base for diseases in general. Our main hypothesis was that if those people who had no family history and no personal history of disease would have the lowest health literacy, whereas those who had both family history and personal history of disease would have the greatest health literacy. Our study was cross-sectionally done online, so our participants filled out a survey which asked them demographics questions, health history questions, risk factor questions for each disease, as well as their health literacy questionnaire. So our health literacy questionnaire was originally made by Osborne. He is an Australian scientist who has developed it in 2013 originally. His intent was to make a tool where you could manage and define health literacy in a community and then watch it as it grows over time. So depending on how their health outcomes and their increase in health literacy in general, they wanted to be able to watch that grow and change over time. We modified our study specifically because we were looking at obesity, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes. So our questions were specified to see how participants were able to navigate our healthcare system and how confident they felt talking to doctors about each disease process. Our demographics looked at sex, age, as well as ethnicity. And we also looked at BMI, which is basically how, on a scale, if someone is obese or not, or if they're healthy in their weight category based on height and weight. We also did an analysis to see if there was a difference in means. And when we had determined that there was a difference in means, we ran an independent t-test to check the means within the groups.
So of the surveys we sent out, we got 128 responses. Roughly 56 were of males and 76.8% were Caucasian descent, which is pretty representative of what the United States is. In 2021, the U.S. Census Bureau reported 76.3% of the population being of white Caucasian descent. So it's only 0.05 off from our study population, which is pretty cool. You can see here that the mean age of our study was roughly 52 years. The age ranged from 18 to 30 years old. We intended to focus on people 30 years and older because we thought they would have a better idea of their health and their family history, but a few people did continue on with the study who were under 30, but we found it beneficial to still include them. The average BMI among all the participants was 28, almost 28, and 28 indicates being overweight. Once you hit 30, that is classified as being obese. And out of all of the subjects, 77 were either overweight or obese. If you look at the table on the right, it assesses the prevalence of diseases in family history and personal history, as well as the commonality of risk factors among these subjects for each disease. So here you can see diabetes was the most prevalent for family history, and obesity was the most prevalent for personal history. Looking at the risk factors, the top 2 risk factors for obesity was having poor diet and low physical activity. For cardiovascular disease, it was having high cholesterol and a high salt intake. And lastly, for type 2 diabetes, the top 2 risk factors of our subjects was high glucose and low physical activity frequency. We further assessed and found several significant differences when we combined the health literacy of all the diseases together. So here the significance is marked with a bar and a star. The red one is measuring the variables that we are looking at in our primary hypothesis. So the 0-0 group represents family history first and personal history next. So having no family history and no personal history of these chronic diseases had a significant difference in means compared to having both a family history and personal history of the diseases. The mean health literacy score in this group was roughly 16 out of 46 and 35 out of 46 respectively. We also assessed the health literacies of diseases individually, and you can see consistency across our graphs. As you saw in the first one, there was a significant indication for no family history and no personal history, with having both family history and personal history of diseases. So they're all significant in these graphs, and you can also see that the other group comparisons vary across different diseases. If you didn't notice, the obesity graph on the far left looks a bit different than those two in the previous graph, and that could be due to, well, first, these bars are showing a higher health literacy among the groups, whereas those ones have like a little bit lower there. And it could be due to obesity being so common among society and the population that people just know more about it. They know someone who has it or experience it themselves. So that might be why health literacy is higher in obesity among more groups.
So these results fully support our primary hypothesis, which is that exposure to family and personal history of disease will have the greatest health literacy scores, whereas those without personal and family history of disease had the lowest health literacy scores. As for our secondary hypothesis, this was partially supported. When looking at those with only family history compared to those with only personal history, there were significant differences seen. However, our hypothesis thought that the remaining comparisons would have differences, but they varied among health literacy assessments. We also wanted to note that our study was the first study of our knowledge that looked at the variables, family history and personal history, on the effects of health literacy. There has been other studies that looked at other variables such as age, sex, education, income, different diseases, and drinking status, but none quite like our study. Some strengths are listed here. As for limitations, our study did not include educational status, but that could have been a variable of interest. Also, we only looked at the 3 diseases: obesity, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes. There's no additional diseases, but that could have been. Also, I don't know and decline to answer options were removed for data analysis, but this could have been used as an indicator of health ignorance. Moving on to future directions, we would love to define health literacy into multiple ranges, such as low, intermediate, and high. Our study only looked at high and low. In addition, it'd be great to study the inverse of our study. We looked at how health history affects health literacy, but it would be great to understand the opposite, which is how health literacy affects health history. In addition, a future longitudinal study could educate students early on in their education about health-related decisions and see how that relates to later on in life and how their health outcomes are. There has been an educational program and there were benefits seen. In 2012, patients with chronic disease were educated in a doctor's office, and there was improvements in their health knowledge as well as them wanting to be more proactive with their own health. There was also low health literacy patients in there, and the education that they were given has shown improvements as well. So to conclude, health history can indicate higher levels of health literacy. More specifically, for our study, we looked at how family and personal history of disease can result into the highest health literacy. So with that, we want to provide readily available information that is easily understood when it's given out to the public. We want to emphasize that health education is key in our community. Thank you.